the way we see that the Indian electricity sector has a bunch of challenges. The first and foremost of which is the whole issue of access. And by access, we mean not only that there is of course a very, very large number, by far the largest number of people in any country in the world who do not have any access to electricity at all. That is, they don't get any electricity supply in their households. In 2011 census, it was 33% of the country. Even now, it's probably about 25 to 30% of the country.
So it is roughly about 40 crore people don't have it.
Yes. It's by far the largest of any country in the world. The interesting thing is, even among the people who have electricity supply, that is, who get power sometimes, as again, all of us have been talking in the various breakout sessions, it's very, very poor quality of supply. So either you don't get it, forget about 24 hours, even 16 hours or in the evening hours when you need it most. And when you get it, even then the quality of supply is poor in the sense that the voltage is unpredictable. Sometimes it's very high, often it's very low. You can't run your appliances, you can't buy appliances. So there are significant problems beyond just providing basic access. And of course, in addition to this, we also are a country that has other problems apart from access. Access is not the only problem. We are a country that is where significant environmental challenges exist in terms of harnessing and supplying energy, especially of the conventional kind, which all of you know about. I don't want to go into that. We also have these electricity projects are typically also very land and water intensive, especially conventional electricity. So those are again issues which are highly contested in India. Land and water are highly sensitive issues, and there are multiple claimants for it. So we are in it's a very, I would say, complex problem, because on the one hand, you do want to provide people with access to electricity for a decent living. We are not talking of luxurious living. We don't want to talk about Western standards of living, but we believe everybody does have a right to have some electricity to lead a decent standard of living. And we have all these other challenges which makes the problem harder. So, and we also, as we saw earlier, the state has also invested a lot in trying to at least put physical infrastructure, however ineffective it may be. So there's also the question of the role that the state has to play in actually enabling this access, and as we are currently seeing, the lack of effectiveness of such efforts on the part of the state. So there's also a question of how do you make the state accountable for what it is doing in terms of providing access to people. And so one of the ideas that we have is that now that you have the grid reaching pretty much everywhere, and today as the situation stands, and again as I think our friends from the practitioner side also keep telling us, grid-based electricity is invariably going to be cheaper than locally produced electricity. We think that the best way to address the access problem is perhaps to provide the cheapest source of electricity generation to the poor who don't have access today, by using the existing infrastructure that you already built, or you should have built. Some of it has probably vanished, but you theoretically have built that infrastructure. So make sure that the infrastructure is working, and you use that infrastructure to provide the cheapest source of electricity that you're producing to people in the country. So this is one theme of electricity access where we think this is an approach that is worth discussing and we are talking about. There are two or three other things that I'll just touch upon before stopping. One is an issue that, again, I think all of us have it in the back of our minds, but I don't think we've talked much about it today so far. In addition to renewables, the other major component, of course, of dealing with this energy conundrum, so to say, is energy efficiency, which is essentially using energy as effectively as, because none of us is really interested in energy for its own sake. What we need energy for is the service it provides us. So as long as we can get the energy service at minimum consumption of energy, that is something that would be desirable. And this is something that needs to be worked on, and I don't want to go into details of specific policy options for that we can perhaps come to later, but there are a whole suite of policy options that are possible depending on which sector you're talking about. And of course there's also huge potential for improvement of efficiency in the electricity sector itself. The efficiency of electricity generation, and of course the well-known problem of transmission and distribution and commercial losses in the country. And other sectors, consuming sectors also, there's a huge scope for improving efficiency. Then there is, of course, renewable energy, which is essentially, I guess, what most of us here believe will be a major element of the solution to the problem. That is obviously going to be a major driver of the future electricity system. But at the same time, we would propose that even renewable energy, it's not that all renewable energy is necessarily always good for all people. So renewable energy policies also need to be introduced in a calibrated manner so that they help transition the energy system without necessarily burdening those who can least afford this transitioning, the cost of this transitioning. So there are again policy options which I don't want to go into the details of, where essentially the idea would be that as long as urban and people who are more capable of paying renewable energy costs are the people who take up the first challenge of bearing the cost of these things. These could be solar rooftop systems in cities or other kinds of solutions. This would perhaps be a better way of introducing renewable energy on a larger scale into the country, so that the introduction of renewable energy is also done in an equitable manner. And finally, the last thing that I just want to touch upon is about institutions, because as I said, there are various stakeholders and actors in the electricity sector, and every one of them is an important actor, as I think practical experiences from various DRE practitioners have also shown. The distribution utility, the state governments, the various actors, the regulatory commissions, another very important actor that we perhaps haven't talked about. So all these actors are important players, and I think one should keep them in mind when one is talking about alternative solutions and how one can make these institutions effective and make them partners in such a transition to an alternative solution. And in this, one of the most important things we feel which is lacking, and this is not particular to the electricity sector but common to many other parts of our society, is lack of sufficient democratization in terms of decision making. Even in front, of course, we know that problems of lack of democratization or democratic decision making in terms of deciding which kinds of projects to come up. I think those problems all of us know about, whether it's coal-based projects or nuclear projects or all kinds of projects where local people are not perhaps consulted as much as they should be, or and so on. But even on the other side, in terms of electricity supply, there is not enough participation by citizens and civil society in terms of influencing the kind of electricity distribution systems, the kind of tariffs that are decided, what kind of, because as I said, these are really heavy investment, big ticket items. And unless there is a very strong civil society oversight on what kind of utilities are coming up, what kind of power plants are coming up, who's purchasing power from whom at what cost, who's paying the cost of this power, we are talking of thousands of crores every year that's going down, being dealt with in this bucket. And today there's not enough spaces and usage of those spaces by civil society organizations in terms of making this thing more, this whole system more accountable and answerable to people. Of course, there's also an issue of capacity of the institutions themselves. It's not that the utilities or the other agencies are necessarily very well equipped to deal with the challenges. These are complex challenges, and there's a problem there also, but that's also an institutional problem that needs to be factored in and needs to be worked on. So one of the, again, the last thing that I just want to say is that one of the things that will of course help in this, all this accountability and institutional answerability question is much greater transparency in terms of all the institutions that are functioning. And whether it is through actually suo motu publication of documents, people participating in processes, or even using technology. So, for example, one small experiment that we are trying, which I think I've talked to some of you about, is in terms of actually having small little devices put out all over India. All that they're doing is measuring the voltage there on a minute-by-minute basis and sending the data to a central server, which is publicly available to everybody to look at. So we are currently trying some such project. But these kinds of initiatives essentially will make the data available publicly, so one can actually make much more, as the fashion goes, make evidence-based arguments to push for certain kinds of policies and certain kinds of improvements in service quality that one needs to look at.
One thing that came up in our discussions, this is in the breakout session when we were talking, one point that came up was in case of distributed, more and more people moving to renewables, who as a stakeholder, whose interests would it impact and which entity will oppose such transition? And in that context, we were discussing why the distribution company, currently the provider of supply, is opposed to such move. They will, for example, many states still don't have net metering regulations, and because of that, it's not easy for people who have. Hello, yeah. So many states still don't have regulations for net metering, and that makes it difficult for people with own rooftop systems to put in electricity in the grid. This is just one example. Or the electricity company may not make it easy for people to choose different suppliers other than itself. And those suppliers could be renewable energy based generating companies. So this is primarily because the distribution company sees any such transition as loss of its sales. And especially, in fact, just now Ashok said that let the transition begin from areas which are better off in terms of paying capacity. Why burden the newly electrified households with such transition? And those areas which are better off are the higher paying consumers of these companies, and they don't want that revenue to go away. And that creates an vested interest, if you may call it, in which will oppose this kind of transition. So that's why you can see that people also talk about there have been renewable purchase obligations. In order to promote renewable energy, the Electricity Act has mandated all distribution companies to source some amount of its power from renewable. But they often did not do that. Similarly, they blocked people who want to choose to other suppliers, and all these things they were doing that. But and they will perhaps continue to do these things because, as I said, their financial interests are at stake. And with a cross-subsidized, the tariff structure that you have, that some people are paying less and some people are paying more, the more paying consumers, whenever they want to choose a different supplier, the distribution company will oppose that in whatever way it can. So that's also another part of the political economy. And another thing that came up is, will it disrupt if too many because solar and wind generation by its very nature is variable. You can have certain scheduling, but unlike a coal-based thermal plant, you really can't order when you want to dispatch solar generation or wind generation. And that creates certain variability. And if everybody, let us say hypothetically, if huge amount of your generation comes from such sources, what will happen to the system, and what will we be able to deal with such variability? So the point we were talking in our breakout group also will be that such a situation is still far away, and any reasonably big system is able to, because today the generation is not fluctuating but the load is fluctuating, and we are dealing with changes in demand. Any significantly big grid is able to deal with it pretty easily. Similarly, to a significant extent, we will be able to deal with in new renewable energy coming into the grid. At some point it will become a problem, but we haven't reached those scales of renewable energy generation as of now. In fact, countries where that has happened have, and there are ways of dealing with it also, but presently at a policy level also we are not worrying too much. The only move that has happened in this context is wind energy producers have been asked to schedule their generation, because in spite of the variability there, you can make certain predictions, you can have certain idea. Of course, the actual generation may not really match that, but you will get some sense, and at least that preliminary analysis needs to be done. So that is where we stand today.
My question is, even after we get the solar energy being more efficient, like 30-35%, and when we have low wind turbines on a commercial basis, which is under research now, so do you see that we will not be able to live with RE alone?
No, I think it's not a question of whether we can live with renewables alone. Of course, eventually, in the future, at some point in the future, one hopes that one will have a completely renewable energy driven system. But I think what Ashwini was trying to say was that is still some distance away when we'll have to deal with, let's say we reach a renewable energy penetration. Today we are at 12% capacity and 6% roughly generation terms. Even if we reach about 20%, which is maybe 15 years away or something like that, we don't see it as a problem. Up to 20% of renewable energy in the grid, as long as you have a good, well-functioning grid, absorbing it is not a problem, and one should, with minimum forecasting, scheduling, minimum amount of management, one should be able to do it easily. The problem might happen, I don't know when, but maybe if you reach a stage when renewable energy forms 60-70% of your total energy, then you might have to have some more sophisticated ways of dealing with it. There are other ways such as demand response. There are other ways. You have alternate balancing power, which so you may need a small amount of fossil fuel based things, or hydro or pump storage kind of things, small hydro pump storage kind of things which can be turned on when required. So you can manage it, but you will have slightly greater technical challenges to deal with. But since those technical challenges are some distance in the future, one hopes that technology would have progressed sufficiently and we'll be able to deal with it easily.
Back to the issue of the variable nature of the renewable energy, I think that question, without being, if it's not properly answered, it may send a wrong signal. But I want to clarify that it is entirely possible. It has been proven. There are a number of simulation studies that have been carried, especially in USA, and Germany is one example. For example, last year, around 54% of Germany's peak power in the afternoon was met entirely by the renewable energy sources. And USA, there have been number of studies. Only in 2015, US Congress heard a submission by a professor by name Jacobson. He is from Stanford University. He has done simulation of all the states in USA and 132 different countries in the world, and projecting the load, existing load to 2050, and he has shown that not just electricity but entire requirement of energy, all transportation, heating, industrial, everything can be met satisfactorily with the technologies that are available today, not in future, and all of them on renewable basis. So there have been a lot of studies, and electricity system engineer, I am also electrical system engineer, they don't have a huge many concerns. But one concern is, as Ashok said, I understand, I have worked in Central Electricity Authority, my friends say that such simulation study have not been undertaken in India before India went ahead and made a very loud announcement of 170,000 megawatt renewable energy capacity. Where they should come, what are the issues and all that. One thing I am very concerned about as a system engineer is, government is going for a large number of huge size solar power parks, wind power parks. They have a lot of system integration problems. They have also reliability problems. They are planning for 4,000 megawatt plant on the Salt Lake in Rajasthan. What happens if that area gets covered by cloud cover within half an hour? If you lose 4,000 megawatt, the system can collapse. So that is an issue. That is why many of us have been advocating for renewable energy, distributed source, especially at all villages level and as many taluk levels as possible with concentrated solar power on earth. But I would like to say, from a system operation point of view, it is entirely possible to go for renewable energy. I don't think, Ashok said it may take around 20 years to reach that 20%. I don't, with the ambition of the government and with so much of effort from NGOs and all that, we will not be there. I think we will be much before that, probably another 10-15 years. We will reach 15 to 20% of that, and even with the existing system technology, I think it's possible to meet. That's why we insist that there should be some changes in the operational behavior, operational standards, and lifestyle changes. We should try to bring as many loads from night time to daytime. If that is possible, I think the system problem will not be there. That will go on. Thank you.
Honestly, I think Ramaji, आपने जो पूछा था, I'm not sure we have an answer to that. In terms of the opposition on the ground level, is it due to political reasons, technical reasons? We don't know. And that could be very location, regional specific. We are not really aware of it. But I think one other thing that I'll use this opportunity to clarify is that, as Shankarji said earlier, it's not that renewables, grid, supplying electricity through the grid does not preclude having distributed generation. These are two independent things. One can have very distributed generation, supplying electricity through the grid. So it's not necessarily that if you're talking of grids, you're necessarily talking of the kind of things that he was talking about. We don't need necessarily 4,000 megawatts centralized solar parks to supply electricity through the grid. One can have grids, and which is the kind of thing that I think people like Ramaji and Abhishek ji and all were talking about, that we are setting up all this investment, having a mini grid in a particular village. If the grid comes, allow us to connect to it. There are a few technical issues to be resolved, but nothing unresolvable. There are issues that can be resolved with some small changes. So one can actually have distributed generation but still a grid, because we feel that has the advantages of the grid providing you a lot more stability, possibility of quality of service being better, not necessarily. So of course you rely on your local resource when it's possible, but if your local resource is not functioning, you can rely on the larger service, and similarly vice versa. If your local load drops, the same supplier can supply to somebody else on the grid. So it offers you a lot of other benefits.
Who bears the cost of the maintenance of the central grid? And whether a distribution cost of power has been factored in when you are comparing the cost of production from renewable to traditional sources.
Who bears the cost of the central grid? I don't know, Ashwini, you want to take
Distribution.
That's essentially that cost is passed through. The cost of maintaining the central grid, which in India is not done very well, but whatever costs are incurred are passed through by the transmission company to the distribution company to the consumer, eventual consumer. So consumers are paying for that.
Because this thing about the current energy sources being the cheapest, the centralized grid system being the cheapest. I mean, this is something I'm sure you thought about, but anyway, it's good to have a discussion on it. Is obviously because the number of costs are not factored in. So if not just the distribution but also the environmental and social costs are factored in, would it still be the cheapest? So should we actually not also be doing that exercise and showing to everybody concerned, including ourselves, to convince ourselves of what really is the cheapest source of energy, if you factor in all the costs? So that's one thing, and of course this is not necessarily in terms of saying that we can even quantify all the ecological and social costs. In fact, that will be another dangerous pathway, but at least to the extent we can, and point out also qualitatively. Air conditioning in an energy sangam. Okay. If we can actually point out even the qualitative issues which are not necessarily quantifiable. So I think that's one thing. Thank you.
We should be very careful when we use the word cheapest electricity. I mean, it's the cheapest available energy source. Leaving apart the environmental and other costs, even if you see the present scenario, it is changing quite fast. All the new coal power plants are pretty much costlier. And nuclear energy has been proved beyond doubt that it is the costliest energy now, and there are many other new costings adding upon. So at present, when we say cheapest, it directly shows the government is cross-subsidizing it at certain level. So it is not what it looks at the end user.
Picking up this issue first of so-called cheap electricity, I knew even when I was saying it that it was a loaded statement and that there was going to be some discussion around it. So I fully agree that today's, shall we say, coal-fired electricity, just to kind of name the devil, does not account for all the externalities, so-called, as economists like to call it, all the externalities it imposes on society and environment and so on and so forth. And there is a very strong need to address that aspect of the story. There's no doubt about it. Unfortunately, as far as we know, we have not, and nobody that we know of has tried to put a value to that. Partly for the reasons that Ashish you mentioned, that we don't even necessarily want to put monetary values to some of these things. That's a dangerous thing in itself. But so it's not a question that we really have an answer to, but there is a very good chance that if you add all that in, there would be the pendulum may swing the other way. But having said that, while these arguments are good arguments to have, I'm talking only of the economic costs. Of course, the social aspects and the environmental aspects are things that we need to continue to work on, ensure that there is responsible development, there is there's no undue displacement, and all those issues are of course there.
The third point is what you said is there is actually no example of what is the external cost. In fact, industry itself has its own estimation. The utility industry, they have done their own estimation. There is a 2010 report which estimated what is the external cost of utilities. And that 2010 values were coming to 87% of the EBITDA. This earning before interest, depreciation, tax, and amortization. And they said that in the next 14 years, this will be double. That means already the total earning before interest and before tax, the electric utilities, 87% of the cost, and this is just the environmental cost, where health is not included, other social costs are not included. So utility industry as a whole again, which includes solar, which includes wind, includes hydro, for just the coal industry, it was something like 124% already. So industry itself has an estimation, which is very low estimation, but even if you go by that estimation, today solar energy is actually cheaper than other utility conventional electricity. And the industry said, as I am repeating, that in the next 14 years, that is by 2024, this will be double. So they have their own estimates, and it is part of a report, expect the unexpected.
But at the same time, we would also like to emphasize that these are debates that we should have, and we should be pushing the envelope in this direction significantly. But at least we feel that I don't think we should make those who do not have access to electricity today wait for these debates to get resolved till they get their few kilowatt hours of electricity that they need to get. If they today, essentially, let's say Maharashtra Distribution Utility is supplying electricity to some consumers at 2 rupees a unit because of old plants, because of whatever unit, because they're not accounting for externalities, whatever it is. All we are saying is it is better that this 2 rupees per kilowatt hour electricity is used to provide access to people who don't have it, and they at least start kickstarting their lives, bootstrapping their lives, rather than this being consumed by some industry in Bhiwandi or in Pune. That's the basic argument.
You can give us some context. To just give some context of numbers, rough analysis that we had done, that there was a while ago planning commission study looking at all the backward districts in India. There were some 175. And if let us say if all households in all these in districts are to be electrified and they use a minimum of 1 unit per day kind of a consumption, the capacity that would be needed to electrify these households would be 14,000 gigawatt and 14,000 megawatt. In just FY 14-15, we commissioned 15,000 megawatt of new coal-based thermal capacity.
I have one point. This lifeline energy, there is 1 unit per day per family. That is coming from IEP, and it's a very old estimate. And as per our present experience, the moment you connect an unconnected household, the aspirational demands go up very high, and there is nothing wrong in that. Because if Delhi government can subsidize those up to 400 units per month, then there's no point in trying to put an artificial limit on the port for 30 units a month. So that's the moment you connect, that 15,000 megawatt will go 50, 60,000, 70,000, and that should be possible to give. So that's one estimate we should discard with.
Now, the point that Ashok is also trying to make is that we are, in a way, the larger question we should raise is to stop this high consumption of other people rather than to make a small household pay 25 rupees per unit for that 1 unit that it uses. That's the only small point we are trying to highlight.
So, for instance, this is a question here. Access to electricity to the poor, yes, should be a fundamental. Let's assume it should be a fundamental right. I might agree with you there. Or at least to energy, maybe electricity. But so is land and water a fundamental right. I don't know of any power station, big power station in India, that does not snatch away land and water from people. So what you're essentially saying is that you're providing one fundamental right to one poor household versus and depriving another one. I don't see, this is a trade-off. Otherwise, I don't see any way in which any new generation of power using coal.
They're saying what already is generated.
Yeah. So that's where the second part of the redistribution comes. So you're saying what's already generated is, but even there, of course, there will be issues because then there's 60 million people or whatever, 30 million people, let us say, who have been deprived in the past.
Yeah.
So, how does that get met? Would the new people who are getting access have to share some of the resources, or again we then take back from the rich what they've been taken? So I think all of these things obviously need to be built into the arguments, because otherwise it seems a little very incomplete, and then the folks who have been displaced or have been displaced or are being displaced say, दूसरे जने को खिलाने के लिए हमसे क्यों ले रहे हो? So I think that's a very crucial one.
Just actually adding to what Ashish was saying, actually I don't even know, this is quite vague, but I was just also wondering, when you're talking about redistribution, you're talking about redistributing the energy that is already being generated, but how about, for example, in the urban setup, CNI subsidizes in a sense what we consume in the household, right? So their tariffs are higher because we pay lower tariffs. That's a problem we have in the solar policy, right? Because if you take off their tariffs or you make it cheaper for them, then ours would go up, our conventional tariff rates. So is something like that possible in the urban household and rural household scenario, where we are paying more and that goes into a sort of a cess, which then can either fund DRE or cheaper conventional electricity in the rural area? Are there any policies on that, or is it possible to ask for something like that? Was that clear?
Maybe they can answer this. I just want to broaden it later.
Okay, we could quickly.
On the urban consumption cess for rural consumption, see, that is in a way already in place in the current tariff structure, because the higher consumption slab, if you would make it geographical, that is perhaps unfair on the urban poor, because just because of being geographically in an urban location, they will be forced to pay more. So a consumption-based cess is perhaps more appropriate rather than a location-based cess. And if you go by that logic, then it is already in place. Already the tariffs are structured that way. The fact is those tariffs will never take into account the costs that we were talking about. See, thermal generation will be treated at the cost that is quoted, and that will not factor in externalities. So whatever new thermal generation comes in, the benefits of that will accrue to people in Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, who will get further cheaper power, and they will continue to consume much more, put in AC in every room and not just one room, and that will happen. So that is a different part.
Can we not have a system in which there's a maximum that a household can have? Why go into cost? Because cost, 10% of India can afford anything. They can afford the most expensive whatever you produce anywhere in the world. Houses, cars, etc., etc., etc. So instead of saying, of course, let's charge more for higher use of electricity, but beyond the point it just trips. You have no power left anymore.
Technically, it's not an issue at all.
Politically I know, but see, again, that's the thing we have to build, no? Because
We are doing this in the off-grid systems. There are load limiters.
No, I'm talking about grid. Forget about off-grid.
It's already there.
So
It's already there. There's something called fuse, trims, a maximum load, maximum demand indicator. It's already there, but it is not widely used.
no, is it even a policy?
It goes in with the fitting.
Is it a?
He's saying a number of units consumption.
Hold on, I'm saying, is it even a policy? It's a policy of the government that beyond the point you cannot use anymore?
No, there is no policy.
So I'm saying, why don't we demand that? I mean, for instance, an Adivasi cannot cut more than one tree in a year. And the forest department is there to implement it. And even if he's not cut one tree, he still gets fined. So why can't we demand that kind of a thing, saying that people simply cannot use beyond a certain point? Finished.
Like when we are working in a Bihar, like we had like solar rooftop report, and then the government announced to go for a solar rooftop program. They had a net metering policy, and according to our report, they talked about like 30 megawatt that they can generate, say like in the next 2 years or so, just by putting panels on the government buildings and the commercial establishment and all. Then we came to know that they cannot basically have it 30 megawatt because the grid and all these things cannot support it. And then I was like really surprised and shocked that is it really like some lobby working against it? I don't know, it's a policy matter, because we all know that entire grid infrastructure in our country is like plant base load factor or whatever that we say, like, base load or something like that. And then there is a kind of a group and people who keep talking not to give space to the renewable energy projects actually in the grid and all. I don't know, I mean Prayas of course works with the central government and at other level, but we are more hearing that they deliberately don't allow those things to go into the grid because of some other political reason and all. I don't know how true actually is that, but these are the things we face on the ground. And I don't know whether it's a policy issue, technical issue, what, and how we can resolve it.
Based on the experiment Professor Jhunjhunwala is doing, on AC up to transformer and DC from transformer to households.
About Jhunjhunwalaji's experiment, I think it's an exciting experiment as far as I know. I don't know too much about it, but it's an exciting experiment. But as of now, I think it's, I understand it's more in a prototype lab kind of a stage. So if it actually is something that can be commercialized, this experiment, for those who may not be aware of it, is essentially talking about providing direct current solutions, because increasingly as lots of our equipment in our homes gets digital, they all can run on direct current. So our mobile phones are actually can run directly off DC, our televisions are digital, computers, laptops are digital. The kind of efficient fans I was talking about, the 35 watt fans, are actually brushless DC motors. They run off brushless DC motors, so they can run off DC. So one can have a DC setup in the house which runs many of the appliances, perhaps not all, maybe not all the appliances can run, but many of them can run. So having a DC kind of approach is what Dr. Jhunjhunwala is trying out, and he believes it can be a way forward in addressing some of these conundrums. But the best of my knowledge is that he's still working on it. We hope it works.
Challenges, like you said, is the availability of DC appliances, because they are not manufactured as easily available. So we've had to actually set up a manufacturing unit just outside of Bangalore for now, which can cater to these. So hopefully, maybe by the end of the year, we'll have a better understanding of how these work and how these can be scaled up.
This thing about super efficient fans, they are available. Versa Drives in Coimbatore makes it. It's if you type super fan in Google, they are expensive because it's in low volume. But you can, I mean.
So cost of DC motors cost has now started coming down drastically. So
in terms of DC, this was just additional information. Ilango Ramaswamy in Kudumbakkam in Tamil Nadu is already using a DC run fan and lamp system, and is now actually manufacturing it in the village.
And the second part I have is that I've seen a very strong initiatives by various state governments to replace the incandescent bulbs with LED bulbs. And how as a unit we here can help that process, because we know that the efficiency level there is about 300% to 3,000% in some cases. A 3 watt LED bulb is equal to a 60 watt incandescent bulb. So what are the initiatives that the government we know is doing, that giving LED bulbs at 10 rupees or 15 rupees just to inculcate that whole logic? But what can be further done to drive this?
In terms of efficiencies themselves, there's a lot that can be done. So I think Amit ji has already pointed out, in case of lighting, it's the most obvious thing, because India is actually doing very well in terms of lighting, even on a global scale. I think we were probably the earliest adopters of CFLs. We are going to be one of the earlier adopters of LEDs in the world. But in terms of other appliances, there's a huge amount of scope there. So even take ceiling fans. I think we sell some 2 or 3 million ceiling fans every year. And the average ceiling fan in India consumes 70 watts, while the world's best available technology in the market today, not in the lab, nothing being sold, is 35 watts, half directly. So if we can bring about policies, and Daljit can tell you a lot more about the effort that he did while he was with Prayas in terms of trying to promote these kinds of fans in India, and unfortunately we've not been very successful yet, but we had proposed different kinds of policy options to promote these kinds of fans. So that's a clear area where one can actually save a lot of electricity.
The second point is the assumption that many of you are doing, but with the qualification. I'm not saying that we should not go for energy efficiency. By all means we should go for energy efficiency. But often we oversimplify this point too much. We don't see what kind of economy responds to energy efficiency, demand side efficiency and supply side efficiency. The demand side efficiency increase often as the result of increased demand, and that has been seen throughout. In fact, I don't want to give other examples. Look at your own household electricity bills 15 years ago or 10 years ago. At that time we used incandescent bulbs. Today all of us are using either LEDs or CFL. In fact, most of it is LEDs. But your total consumption of electricity has gone up several times. So we should be careful about where in the economy, in demand side or supply side, where efficiency increase intervention work better, and which actually results in increased demand. So I'm again qualifying. I'm not saying that that doesn't mean that high efficiency appliances should not be pursued. That's a different question. But cutting down on total consumption, demand side efficiency often do not work, and there are a lot of examples.
The second point that you were,
Redistribution actually don't work in the favor of the poor, because that's what we have seen. With the efficiency increase, the extra available power has actually gone to higher consumers. Who are able to
No, that is what has happened, but what you're proposing is that one should use that to...
What Ashish is saying, without a regulatory policy.
Yes, exactly, that's what we are...
That is precisely...
No, it's not market.
We are not saying market determined.
It's market.
No.
Efficiency
can be policy driven.
Efficiency can be policy driven, but access cannot be. Increasing efficiency cannot be translated directly to access. So for that, a regulatory policy.
Absolutely. In fact, that is
It has to be regulatory. The whole fact is that if it would have happened that way, it would have happened on all this year.
It would have anyway happened.
Capacity has increased so much, but access has not increased.
Because we also know Indian economies, overall Indian economy's energy efficiency has increased by more than 33% in the last 8 years. But that has not resulted in energy, electricity and other energy going to the poor or deprived.
In fact, that's why we believe
for
that there is a need for the state.
Yeah.
The state has a role to play in actually providing access. It is not something that's going to happen without the state playing an active role.
And
I think the point about the Jevons paradox is also very well taken. That is, of course, Jevons paradox being what he was saying, where increasing efficiency only leads to increased consumption and not reduced consumption, because you have the money to spend for more in certain sectors and economies. It's a very well taken point, and that's where the kind of things that Ashish was talking about are much steeper in terms of actually putting a limit on the consumption or having much steeper tariffs and so on and so forth. And these things have to be actually one other problem in our electricity sector, at least we feel, is that the state, which is responsible for formulating policies, is invariably years behind the state of the art. So these sectors are so dynamic, things are changing so fast. LEDs are coming in, solar tariffs are going down, efficiencies of various things are going in, which means you actually need to change your tariff policies equally fast to make sure that that upper limit actually has to keep coming down, because the efficiencies are improving. Otherwise, if you keep it there, people are only going to consume more. So those kinds of things, you need a much more nimble, responsive policy regime, which we don't have. And that goes back to capacity of institutions, all those kinds of problems that we also talked about.
We should not dilute the role of efficiency by giving that particular principle. Because if you have not gone for that efficiency, the demand would have been much, much more than what it is there. So efficiency has a very important role. I think we cannot dilute that.
And essentially that can be a tool of redistribution, is it? Yeah, I think one of your questions, Ashish, was also related to redistribution. So efficiencies can be a tool for redistribution also, if you can. And with respect to things like air conditioners, we think one can have much, much stricter standards, ensuring that you don't, even your minimum efficiency standard can be much higher, make sure that AC is below a certain efficiency, don't even come into the market. All kinds of policy measures are possible. Some of them are in force, but as usual, I don't think they're sufficient. One needs to keep ratcheting it up and tightening the strings, but there are options available. It's not that options are not available.
And the second thing is maybe a little bit, I think the hint that Shankarji had given about night and day use of energy, but also the demand management thing. So obviously one is not talking about managing demand of the poor who don't have any access at all or have very little access, but managing demand of ours, our kind of demand, and then the redistribution, which of course politically very difficult, but then we're talking about difficult political things anyway. So these two things, I was wondering how you build them in, and if you do, then whether the case of decentralized renewables becomes so much better.
This is about how can we introduce demand management for the higher end consumption. I think that's a very pertinent question. The only solutions that I know of are essentially telescopic tariffs with very, very steeply rising tariffs for consumption beyond a certain limit. So essentially, you have tariffs. Even today, we do have telescopic tariffs that you are charged depending on how much you're consuming. But we don't, perhaps the curve can be much steeper. So as your consumption goes up, the charges could go up significantly.
You know, Girish at Prayas had made a suggestion that beyond a certain point you would mandate RE generation beyond. So if you had 300 kilowatt hours, if you consumed above that, you would have to generate your own power for that increment, which is in a way capping it without actually saying you can only use so much.